Thanks for joining us today. I'm here with Isaac Lewis, Salesforce CTA, to talk a little bit about his background, Salesforce, and a little bit about security as well. Thanks for having us today, Isaac.
Nice to be here. It's off.
So just to get started, would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit and just give a little bit about your background?
Yeah. My name is Isaac Lewis. I'm a Salesforce CTA. I've been in the ecosystem about 13 years. I started in nonprofit space with Salesforce donating 10 free licenses to our organization and didn't know much about software at all, but fell in love with the program, fell in love with the idea of serving your customers, CRM, customer relationship management. So went down the rabbit hole from clicks to code, code to architecture, architecture to CTA. And I've been loving the ecosystem ever since. I've worked with customers in-house, then partners, consultancies, worked inside of Salesforce as well. So yeah, I'm loving the ecosystem.
That's awesome. That's kind of like myself as well. I got started about 18 years ago. I started out as a Salesforce developer, but I didn't even know I was a Salesforce developer. I just got hired as a developer at this software company. And then day one, they said, hey, we want you to learn this thing called Salesforce. Have you ever heard of it? I said, no. I said, great, go to developer.force.com. You've got 30 days. And I was like, I'm going to get fired. I drank the Kool-Aid and there I am.
Yeah.
So anyway, sounds like you're one of those people that started out, the non-technical CTAs that kind of just became technical, not even a computer science degree or anything like that. First thing I literally asked you about CTA is, what did you find the most challenging about the path or the road to CTA? And a secondary question to that would be, did you initially intend to get your CTA or did it just kind of happen?
I guess when I started in Salesforce, there were only 6 certs. Now there's, close to 40?
Yeah.
Not more than 40 now. Everything was just kind of PDF workbooks and just figure it out. I was more just enjoying the experience of learning. I love learning to do new things, and empowering me, someone who didn't know code, to build software was very compelling. As I was learning about the Salesforce platform, I was also dabbling with a lot of the new Codecademy type online web learning around HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So I was just having fun. I just like a kid playing with Legos. That's pretty much what I was. As far as the CTA journey, where that started for me is I was working for a small boutique consultancy. Salesforce released the beta exams for the CTA, and I was just lowly developer config. I was not the person to invest in for that journey because it was expensive at the time. But another architect at the group did receive the funding, and he shared his materials with me to really understand how do I'm like, I'm totally not ready for this journey, but I really want to know what the journey looks like. And so I went through the betas. I got through almost all of them except for the identity and access manager. And then I ended up moving around a lot of different places. So I put my journey on pause. And like I said, I really wasn't ready for the proper CTA journey, but getting that foundation of knowledge at the beginning helped me with all of my projects from that point forward, really making it real and seeing it work. What do large data volumes mean? Lived out, actually implemented. What do security considerations and sharing and visibility considerations mean lived out? And just getting to work through all the domains hands-on, having the foundational structure of all that information from the certs. Then the actual CTA journey, I would say, began when I formally started a coaching academy. I used Flow Republic and was really preparing for that board experience. And it's true when they say that getting through all of your certs is only half the journey. I know it seems like a lot, but it's only half the journey, because preparing for the board and being able to synthesize all that information in the right way, repeatably, reliably, and presenting efficiently is a tough ask. And it requires a different kind of preparation than just answering questions on an exam.
I completely agree. I always tell everyone about how the soft skills are almost just as important as learning the technical skills, because if you can't present effectively, then you won't be successful. I talk with a lot of people about the CTA, and the CTA shouldn't be your goal. It's a way just to validate your skills and how to help push you along. The bigger piece is it should be more about your career growth, how to think like an architect. What is truly what an architect? Versus if you're just going for a CTA because you want your CTA, that's really not the right way to think about it. Because I know myself, when I first started down my CTA journey, and I got my CTA in 2014, a little bit earlier, I remember I gained probably 200, 300% more than I knew before I ended that journey. It's kind of interesting for me as well. You worked in that beta program initially for the pyramid, all the Spark Journey search. I was a little bit earlier. Those didn't even exist when I got my CTA, so I was grandfathered into that. When you were saying beta, I was actually thinking the beta exam for the CTA. I remember taking that online, the beta exam, and it was double the questions. It was crazy. I think it took me 6 hours to complete the test.
Wow.
That's a completely different beta. Tell me about those. You think the pyramid helps people getting your CTA, preparing you for that next level? And like you said, that's only half the way there.
Yeah, exactly. Turning information into knowledge and knowledge into wisdom, the ability to apply that information. You got to know that information to start with. Two ways to look at it. One is to get all the information, learn the lessons, and then go apply it. Sometimes it's actually helpful to get real world experience, get a few cuts and scrapes, and then go back and study the formal thing and see like, oh, that's what they meant. That's why they said not to do it. It really probably depends on everybody's learning styles. But beta exams, they were larger. They're still sampling which questions are going to be the right ones. And that way they were more grueling. But at the same time, it was a once in a career opportunity for me, at least, to get all the free certification. To have made it through almost all of them was great. But the Identity and Access Manager, that one still eluded me for a little while longer.
That's a good segue here for a little bit of a transition. I myself never had to take this for my CTA. I've started to take them because I think they're very important to keep you fresh and understand, you know, and if I'm helping people, it's good for me to understand what is that journey they have to go through, since it was a lot different when I did it. Talked before a little bit, but you told me that in your prior projects, you focused on different aspects of security. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and your passion for security?
About half of my career I've spent working with financial services clients. And obviously being in a highly regulated industry, their standards that they have to hold are extremely high. Security is not an afterthought. It is foundational. You have to get your security right. You cannot get that wrong. That's where a lot of my projects have had to wrestle with kind of every aspect of security on the platform. How can you secure things? Having defense in depth, thinking about each layer of your architecture, making sure that everything is secured from the ground up. That goes all the way back to vendor selection when customers are asking Salesforce about how they physically secure their servers, all the way up to the application layer, which is where we're spending most of our time, to deployment, making sure that we're securing things as they actually move into those environments. There's a lot of different facets to discuss with security.
I completely agree. When I worked at Salesforce years ago, I worked on insurance companies, medical, and I remember it was very grueling. I ended my career in government at Salesforce, where I was one of the leaders in the public sector. And I remember when I was working on a lot of these highly regulated customers, you always had to go through very grueling security reviews. Even working for Salesforce, I remember they would say, we want to not only evaluate the platform, but the infrastructure as well, even though the platform I know is very secure. Typically, I focus with most customers on the platform because that's where it should be. But I remember just in general, just how highly regulated financial service, they look at that bigger picture. And I think security, it's about the bigger picture. It's not one thing. And even with my own product for Easy Protect, we go through lots of security reviews, as you can imagine, with a lot of customers. There's so many questions. I remember once I got a 200-line questionnaire. But it wasn't about any one answer, really. It's about what's your overall security postures or anything that you're doing that looks like that you could be risk. There's never, as I find, one size fits all, whether it's in just a general security review or just architecting a Salesforce security solution. It's all about looking at the risk for those answers or the way you're approaching it. And is that risk relevant for this situation, for this customer? That can even change over time, right? All right, great. Let's talk a little bit about security in Salesforce. So Salesforce Security, I think a lot of it stayed the same over the years. If you go back to the original sharing model with object level sharing, role-based sharing, that's always been there. But then I think they've expanded that in different ways over time, as well as they develop new technology, especially with Lightning. I remember when I first started, there wasn't even Visualforce or Apex. So that was even different. And then that started getting introduced, and you have to think about sharing in code and then other things. And then things got even more complicated when process builders got introduced, and then flow, how that impacts security. So I think it's very interesting that the whole broad angle about security in Salesforce. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the security of the platform and how you feel like it's changed over time.
Some of the things I like about Salesforce are that rather than being a full stack application where you're having to pick every component at every layer and having to make security decisions about every component at every layer, Salesforce is still pretty committed to, let's keep our customers focused on that highest level piece that's most relevant to their business and keeping that configurable so we can focus on solving the business problem as opposed to just plumbing. So I think Salesforce has still remained true to that when it comes to the security disciplines that we need to exercise when configuring the platform. There's a lot that's already taken into consideration. So you're working already on a pretty well thought through architecture at various levels. At the IP layer, all you're having to think about is login IP ranges and basic IP whitelisting. When you're working at transport layer, all you have to think about is just getting your CA signed certificate for TLS encryption, maybe mutual authentication if you want it for an extra layer of security. When you get into your application layer, that's where it really blows out, right? And even the basics of session layer as well, you could talk about that. But like application layer, that's where we're going to have a lot of fun spending most of our time around how do we solve for our application and how we want it to present. Obviously, with great power comes great responsibility. You can still build something that exposes all those things you've spent so much effort trying to protect if you're not careful. If you incorrectly create a string interpolated SQL query, if you build an ARA-enabled method to expose as a Lightning Web Component Apex controller, it's very possible for someone to invoke that same method from somewhere else in the browser within that window. If you have an insecure extension or something that has access to your page, to invoke that same method and query whatever they want. It's still very possible to build something that just opens the doors wide up. So there's a lot of mindfulness that still needs to be employed in terms of how we go about building our code, the patterns that we implement to call and fetch data, what methods we implement out of the box from Salesforce to strip fields and strip records out of our queries to ensure that we're being compliant with the record level settings and the field level settings that we've employed for our users. It's also, as you pointed out, flows. It's worth calling out that those can also run without record level sharing. And if you look at the implementation of flows, you can invoke flows programmatically as well. The main thing I would advise people is that don't just think about the UI. Your data can be exposed through API, through UIs, and if you're not careful, you can still leave a lot hanging out there, even if you can't see it on the page. Just for making sure that you can actually validate that you've properly secured things at every layer, the customizations you've made, even the standard Salesforce APIs, and your front ends.
Exactly. It's really about taking into consideration your overall security posture in Salesforce and not just one individual thing. As you said, with great power comes great responsibility. In Salesforce, they give you so much power. Also, that's a little bit of the crux is that's also very complicated. The whole security model is complicated. It's hard to really understand, especially if you really didn't think it through. It's really easy to open things up, but it's also gives you the flexibility that you need. This comes to another topic I recently gotten into more and more is Salesforce Well-Architected. And that's a big thing, big topic even in Salesforce right now is pushing Well-Architected, creating these well-architected solutions. And you kind of touched on that a little bit about putting a well-architected security architecture, not looking at it from the business side. What does the business need to do? But then thinking about it the whole way. It's not just something you think about one, you're thinking about it for your holistic solution. Then even 5 years from now, what's that going to look like, right?
Yeah, Well-Architected is a good resource. There's a TED Talk out there talking about the importance of checklists, ensuring quality of care in hospitals. The TED Talk is quite fascinating because they talk about how simple things get missed. And these are very well-educated, smart people operating at a very high level, and they still miss essentials. To keep us all honest, we all need it. It's really helpful to have those things that say, have I really thought through everything? Have I really done the best that I can? Have I missed anything? Because it's really hard to hold it up in our head. I have a horrible memory. I'm not a good architect because I have everything swimming around in my head, which for the CTA, you can only maintain that capacity where you're kind of keeping everything in your head for a short while. It's not really possible to maintain that posture every single day. Having checklists like that, resources like that are very thorough, where you can go through and say, am I using all the tools that I can be using to defend our platform? Am I using the right tools? Am I using the best tools to defend my platform? The outcomes that I'm seeking, which is one of the benefits of the well-architected framework, it's really oriented around what outcomes am I trying to achieve in my architecture? Am I realizing those? Is there anything else I could be doing to better realize those? That's one nice thing about the well-architected framework.
Exactly. And that's one thing that I feel like it's getting better and better. I think the security part still needs a little bit of improvement. I've been talking with a number of people that are running the program as well, trying to help them see what that might look like in the future. So one other thing I want to discuss a little bit more is something that people don't really realize too much. I think you had touched on that a little bit with talking about looking holistically, looking at your code, looking at making sure you're doing coding best practices, you're not exposing anything, your queries are not exposing data. You also touched on the Aura as well. I think back when Visualforce was out, you didn't have to worry about that too much. I remember there was customer portal, and then sometimes Salesforce Security, just due to customer requirement, you had multiple use cases of different types of data and just wouldn't work exactly the way you needed it to. What people do is use it in code, right? You create a Visualforce page, open up all your objects to public read only, or God forbid, publicly write, which is not a great practice really, because there's still other ways they could get to it, like through the API and so forth. At least through Visualforce, it was all server side anyway. You would use a server side code to programmatically control the access. But now with Lightning components, that's completely changed, or changed how that data is being accessed, because it's more of a client-side framework than a server-side framework. I had a customer recently that in Salesforce, where it was the same thing. They didn't realize that, and a lot of people don't, that Lightning is driven by a bunch of APIs as well. They're all client-side APIs that help you render Lightning all the way down to the page layouts, where the components are on the page, and executing Apex code, retrieving the list views. I think a lot of people don't realize is the components themselves, you can't hide them. You can't say, oh, this person can access this component. You can't. It's all about the data layer. There are inherent risks that people could have if you're trying to use the same approach you did for Visualforce development for Lightning as well. I was just curious about your perspective on that. What are the things that you'd say that what people should be looking out for when developing in Lightning to ensure that they're not having any kind of data exposed, any kind of risks and so forth?
Yeah. The main thing, like you're saying, is being aware of where the security boundary is. The security boundary, it's not somewhere inside of your Lightning component. It's the line between your server controller and your front end. And just being mindful that anytime you expose a method from the server, that's the line of security. To your point of anyone, it's not just your component that can per se call that method. Better to treat as a least trust principle. Imagine that anyone could call that method, what would happen? And kind of treat that as the security guideline of how you implement your components. What's really eye-opening is going through a penetration testing cycle of a front-end Salesforce implementation. Particularly, I've worked with several Experience Cloud implementations, and it's always fascinating when the penetration tester comes back with what they were able to execute. And it's just very telling. And sometimes you have to kind of see that to really appreciate how it works. And I think you've mentioned even providing resources to help people understand what does it look like for Salesforce to be hacked. When you poke around, what does it look like? It gives you a new appreciation for, oh, these methods really matter the way that we implement them. If you're trying to secure things within the client, after they've left the server, you will have a far harder time properly securing your secrets that are coming through from the server. So it's best to keep that boundary of protect it, do the secure processing you need to do on the server before bringing it over into the client.
Exactly. I think the key term these days is zero trust, right? What a lot of people say. And I think that's the approach you should take for sure when you're developing any of your Salesforce applications, starting at the data layer, right? Because of the Lightning APIs, it's not just with the REST API, you can turn it off. You can't turn them off because they run the entire Lightning system. In general, Salesforce best practices, you shouldn't give people access to data that they shouldn't have access to. Even if you try to hide it in front of the code, there's always some way that someone could get to that data. And then what if that person can even get to the REST API? They can also get to it. The first place you should secure it is make sure they can't get to the data they don't need to get to, because if you open it up, then you can just use the same APIs that Lightning uses to get that data. The same thing goes with files. If I can upload a file, then I can upload a file through one of the APIs as well. I think that's the key. Same thing with Apex. Make sure your Apex classes aren't returning data that could be useful to someone that's trying to perform an attack, whether you trust the person or not. Maybe someone even penetrates their account and then they can do things. Same thing when you're sending data in, make sure you can't do something that's destructive, that's going to have checks and balances in your code. Those are just generally the things that I tell people. That goes back to the well-architected security solution. Make sure that you're thinking about it not only on the declarative, but the programmatic. I try to think, if I was an attacker, what could I do? What are the things that I could do? Something that's very scary to me too is a lot of customers sometimes will open up to create cases from the guest user, from the public sites. I could technically, as an attacker, flood an org with cases, or I could put malicious URLs in cases, attach files to cases. Same thing goes with email to case too. It's just sometimes you have to do it, but just finding the right ways to mitigate that and make sure you understand the risk before you're doing that.
Well said.
I know we've talked about quite a bit, security, CTA, a ton of things. It's been a very interesting discussion for sure. But is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience about Salesforce, Salesforce CTA, Salesforce Security, any kind of recommendations or anything you would give for anybody?
If we're talking about CTA, as we talked about earlier, the process is the prize. It really is. If you're wanting to embark on the full CTA journey, do it for the right reasons. Don't stress yourself out to have mastery, just to have mastery. For me, my coach spent a lot of time with me identifying that it's about joy. I want to enjoy what I do, and I want to do it well so that I can enjoy what I do. And that being kind of my motivating factor, so that I can continue to have fun doing what I'm doing and be prepared. It's not a journey to be taken alone. Definitely partner up with people, find coaches, find support. Software is not an individual contribution sport. We sometimes think it is, but it's really, this is a team sport. So be prepared to work as a team and get feedback from people and give feedback. We could probably spend a lot of time just talking about general CTA support, but I think that's the most important, was just be prepared to do it as a team, and the process is the prize. When it comes to security, as we've talked about, I think the well-architected framework is a great starting point. Review the list. I'd say, is there anything today that you can do to take one more step to secure the platform? really well-secured platforms aren't built overnight. It's usually built over iterations of implementation, review, stronger, stronger, stronger. Review your platform, review the best practices out there, review the tools that are available today. Are the ones that you're using still the best ones to use today? And just what's one more thing you can do to make it slightly stronger?
Got it. Excellent. That was amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For sure.